You've lost weight. I have worked hard, but we are succeeding now. It was nearly creation out of nothing. Now there is something. In Paris and Rome and Vienna and Geneva, there is now something. He looked at me sadly. All this material, Asher, this paper and the paints and the easel, all this you've bought with the money you made during errands for your Uncle Yitzkov and Reb Yudel Krinsky? Mama helped. Jacob Kahn helped. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I'm not reconciled, Asher. I'm not able to accept what you are doing. I have told the Reb I am not reconciled. I was quiet. It is not possible for me to accept this. He moved his arm in a weary gesture, indicating the reproduction on the walls and the canvases near the windows, the drawings on the desk. This is not what I wanted from my son. In this matter, I do not care what the Reb tells me. You are my son and not the son of the Reb. I am not reconciled. Asher, do you intend to go to college? I think so, yes. You will continue to study with Jacob Kahn? Yes. You will not be able to come to Europe? No. He nodded slowly. The Ribbono Shona Shel Halom is sometimes unkind. What would it have hurt him to have kept the Sitra Achra away from you? What? Do you not forget your people, Asher? This is all I ask of you. This is all that is left of me to ask of you. I was quiet. There was a long silence. He turned and stared from the room. Papa. He looked at me. Were you in Russia, Papa? He blinked and stiffened. He said very quietly, sometimes there are questions that should not be asked, Asher. I still have questions I do not ask. I saw him look at the drawings on my desk. I followed his eyes. He was looking at one of the drawings I made of the nude model in Jacob Kahn's studio. I had signed and dated the drawing. The date stood out clearly beneath the signature. Good night, Asher. He went quietly from the room. My mother said to me one day during Sukkos, Asher, do you think you could move in with your Uncle Yitzkov if I went with your father to Europe? I stared at her and was afraid. Your father needs me. I was here when you needed me. Now your father needs me. This year. No, next year. I don't want to live a whole year with Uncle Yitzkov. Why? I don't want to talk about it. We'll talk about it, she said. You are not the only member of this family with special needs. My father returned to Europe in the second week of October, and I returned my journeys to Jacob Kahn's studio. I came into the kitchen one night in November and found my mother staring at the table. Mama? She looked up at me. Is anything wrong, Mama? No, I was remembering. Her voice sounded strange. Remembering? Yes. What? Just remembering. Another night, I found her standing alongside her table in the living room, gazing out the window at the dark streets. The table was piled high with her books and papers. Mama? She did not respond. Mama? Yes, Arya, she said softly. Of course, I'm coming. Mom, are you all right? She then turned startled. Asher, she murmured. Asher. She seemed small and frail, and I thought she had been crying. One Shabbat night in December, we sat together at the dinner table, and after a pause during Zemenos, she began in a hum my father's melody to the Rohe Ribbono Holom. Her eyes were closed. She hummed softly. I had the feeling that she was not aware of what she was doing. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, then she looked quietly down. She seemed surprised to find herself with me. She began another melody. I joined her and we sang together. She said to me a few nights later, You're out so late, Asher. What do you do in the library so late? I study. For school? No, for Jacob Kahn. She looked at me in surprise. Art history, reproductions. It's very important, Mama. Can't you bring the book home, Asher? A lot of them are reference books, Mama. It's very lonely here at night, Asher. At breakfast one morning in January, my mother said to me, I finished my dissertation, Asher. The university is asking me about my plans for next year. Shall I tell them I'll be in New York? Yes, I said, yes. She sighed softly and was quiet. I heard her in the living room late that night, talking to herself in strained whispers. I had wakened from a dream about my mythic ancestor. I had not dreamed about him for a while now. He had made up for his absence. My heart pounded from the dream. I felt the blood in my head. I lay rigid in my bed, and then I heard my mother in the living room. She was whispering words I could not understand. Then I recognized the sounds of the words. She was whispering in Russian. I lay in my bed and did not know if I was terrified by the dream or by my mother's whispers. After a while, she stopped. I heard her slippered feet come through the hall. Then she went into her room. I could not sleep. I turned out the light and went to the bathroom. I came back to my room and sat at the desk and could not draw. I went back to bed. Faint light framed the window by the time I was asleep. Jacob Kahn watched me work on a painting in his studio that Sunday afternoon, and after a while she said angrily, "What are you doing? Stop. You are making a mess. Where is the unity of form? The colors are not holding together. Wipe it out and start again." I put the brushes down. "What is the matter with you today? Are you ill?" "No." He looked at the canvas. "What were you painting?" "My mother." He looked at me. "You are not ready yet to move away from representational form. You think such painting is a joke?" I felt my face go hot. "No," I heard myself say. "I never thought it was a joke." "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That was a foolish thing to ask." I apologized. "Now pick up your brushes and start again. You are making a painting. I do not care what your painting is about. First, it must be a painting. Straighten out your feelings inside yourself and make a painting. Or go home and take a shower and go to sleep." I wiped the face from the canvas, but I could not do anything else. I could not even paint a line. "I don't know what I want to say. I don't know how I feel." "Go home, Asher Lev. We have all impossible days." My mother said to me sometimes during this week, "Asher, why don't you want to live with your Uncle Yitzkov?" "I don't." "Why? I just don't." "You're not being nice," she said. "You're behaving like a child. A summer is all right, but not a whole year. Once you would have been delighted for our permission to live with your Uncle Yitzkov." I did not say anything. "I have to make a decision in the next few weeks, Asher. The university has begun their staff for the coming year. I don't want to be alone, Mama." "I know," she said, "but it may be time for you to try to concern yourself with what others want, Asher. You're not the only person with needs in this world." I could not sleep that night. The next night, I slept and dreamt of my mythic ancestor, who came thundering through dark primal forests of moist trees, shouting at me with a voice that splintered the words into long slivers of metal. I woke and remained awake the rest of the night. The next morning, I fell asleep over my Gemara in class and was awakened by the teacher's heavy hand on my shoulder. He was a short, round man with dark beard and glittering dark eyes, and he was considerably less indulgent towards me than my other teachers had been. "Rembrandt sleeps," I heard him say in Yiddish. "The whole world must hold its breath with Rembrandt when he sleeps." Soft laughter moved through the classroom, eyes fastened upon the teacher. I had been the butt of their laughs for years now. I was still accustomed to it. The teacher glared down at me. "Listen, Rembrandt Lev." There was loud laughter. "In my class, no one sleeps. You have to go to sleep, go home. In my class, we study Torah. We do not study how to sleep. If you fall asleep again in my class, I will make life bitter for you. Do I make myself clear? Are my words simple enough for you to understand? If you fall asleep and make people say shasha, I will make your life bitter like galgal." There was slowly wipened ripple of laughter at the explanation of the play of the name Chagall was whispered through the room. The teacher turned and walked up the aisle to his desk. That day was the day someone slipped a note in my Gemara during the lunch recess. I found it when I returned to my desk. It was written in ink, the white paper, and printed in block letters. Magdalene, Passin, and Sutin worked in ochres and ultramarine. Sutin lived in a strife. Passin took his life, and Magdalene used drugs for cuisine. I looked up from my seat in the back row of the room. I felt the blood in my face and head. I looked carefully around the room. The teacher's voice droned dully over a passage. Gomorrah. A few seats in front of me to the right, I saw a student's head begin slowly to turn in my direction. I looked quickly down at the poem. One of the corners of my eye, I watched the smile spread quickly across the pimply face. Out of the corners of my eye. I could almost hear the high, piercing voice. Here comes Asher, Picasso Lev, the destroyer of Torah. Make way for Goy Lev. Here, Asher, do you draw dirty pictures too? Draw a dirty picture for the Masfia. Draw me, Asher. No, draw me, Asher Lev. Draw me, draw me. I folded the note and put it into one of my pockets. I could see the block letters and the words. Sutin lived in strife. Passin took his life. I saw those words all the rest of the day in school and was asleep seeing them at night as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep. The next day there was another note in my Gomorrah. Asher Lev won't go to Kiev. To hell he'll go, far down below. That night, I found myself seated at my desk, shaking with rage. I saw in front of the blank sheet of drawing paper and felt the rage like a wild torrent inside me. I never felt such rage before. I wanted to kill him, to beat him and smash him and kill him, so I would never again have to see his pimply face or hear his piercing laugh. I drew a line on the paper. Then I drew circles and points and whirls. I drew more lines. I looked at the paper. It was meaningless and absurd and very bad. I threw it away. My mother said to me on Saturday night, I will be back late. Don't wait up for me. Is this the meeting about Russian Jews, Mama? Yes. Are you going to talk to the Reb about next year? Yes. I don't want you to go away, Mama. I know what you don't want. Good night, Asher. I worked a long time on the canvas in Jacob Kahn's studio the next day. I avoided recognizable forms. He came over to me and peered at the canvas. It is interesting, he said, but it is a failure. I put my brush down. Your feelings about your mother are producing terrible art. Paint still lifes for a while. Do some self-portraits. You are making a mess with these other efforts. He was merciless over failure. The subway ride back home, the night was a torment. The next day, I found another copy of the first poem in my Gomorrah. Magdalene, Passin, and Suntini. And 2 days later, I found Asher Lev won't go to Hev. My mother was at a meeting that night, and I was alone in the apartment. I wandered through the silent room, stopping for a moment to gaze through the living room window at the parkway outside. The street had begun to feel quietly hostile to me, as if it was resentful of my journey away from it and of the alien skills I brought back each time I returned. The metal lamppost felt cold to my eyes. The light they cast seemed filled with the darkness, mist. The trees swayed in a winter wind, their naked branches back in the night, and were strangely insubstantial. I saw it then, quite suddenly, and knew what I would do. 1 second there had been nothing, and then there was the idea. I did not understand what had happened to bring on the idea. I went away from the desk and came into my room. Sitting at my desk, I drew with a pen, working slowly, calmly, and with ease, the segment from Michelangelo's Last Judgment of the boat beached on the Styx and Charon, striking at his doomed passenger with an oar, forcing them onto the shores of torment and hell. I drew much of it from memory, but I wanted to be as accurate as I could, so I checked it repeatedly against a reproduction in a book I had purchased on Michelangelo. I drew the writhing, twisting, tormented body spilling over the boat. I drew the terror of the face, of the dead and the damned. I made all their faces, his face, pimply, scrawny, eye-bulging, mouths open, shrieking in horror. I exaggerated the talons and painted ears of raging eyes. I folded the drawing and went to bed. The next day, on my way out of the classroom for the noon recess, I slipped the drawing into his Gomorrah. I saw the sudden stiffening of his shoulders when he found it. I saw him stare at it. I saw him look to me, then stop. He crumpled up the drawing, but he did not throw it away. He put it in his pocket. That night, I drew a segment from the Last Judgment of a man being pulled headlong into hell by serpentine demons. I drew his face on the man and put on the drawing into his Gomorrah the next day. He said nothing to me about the drawings, but he began to avoid me. His thin face would fill with dread whenever he caught me looking at him. I had the feeling he regarded me now as evil and malevolent, as a demonic and contaminating spawn of the other side. I did not attempt another painting of my mother that Sunday. Instead, I did a painting of the boy in my class at the moment he saw the first drawing I had slipped into his Gomorrah. Jacob Kahn called the painting evil and excellent. 2 days later, my mother told me she would be going to Europe at the end of June and would remain there throughout the coming year. I was to live with my uncle Yitzkov so I could come with her to Europe and live in Vienna. Or I could come and live in Vienna. Asher, look at me, she said. In response to my pleas, how many of me do you see? I did not answer. You only see one. There is only one of me. I can be in only one place at one time. Your father needs me. Do you understand? And I want to spend the year with your father. I don't want to talk about it anymore. The Rebbe approved of the decision. Your father will remain in Europe, and I will join him at the end of June. Papa will not come back from Pesach? No. She became angry when I continued to plead, and then she plead that she stay. Pink spots colored her high cheekbones. Her voice became stringent. She called me a child. She said that half a dozen of children would have made more demands on her than I had. Now it was time for my father. He needed her. Did I understand that? He needed her. He was exhausted from the work, and he wanted her to be with him. If I wanted her to, I would have to come to Vienna. She stormed angrily out of the room. I talked to Jacob Kahn. Yes, he said. I know all about it. Your mother called me. I don't want to live with my uncle. Why not? He's loud and fat and rich. There is nothing wrong with being rich. It is the rich who buy paintings. It is when you are bought by the rich that you will know you are a success artist. He's a bore. You will not have to grow accustomed to it. The world will indulge you just so long, Asher Lev. Then it will stop. You'll simply have to grow accustomed to that truth. The Masfia called me into his office during the first week of April. The Reb wanted to talk to me alone. For the second time in my life, I climbed the flight of stairs in the Ladover building and went along the hallway to the waiting room. This time, the room was crowded. It was there almost an hour before Rav Mendev Dorachov took me into the Reb's office. The Reb sat quietly behind the desk. His eyes were dark. Outside of the arch window, the street glittered in the April night. Sit down, Asher. There, yes, sit down. It has been a while since I have seen you, but I have been kept informed. Yes, they tell me the world will hear of you one day as an artist. I was quiet. I have you in mind and heart, Asher Lev. I pray to the Master of the universe that the world will one day hear of you as a Jew. Do you understand my words? Jacob Kahn will make of you an artist, but only you will make yourself a Jew. I was quiet. There was a long silence. The streets throbbed faintly beneath the dark canvas of night. Asher, Lev. Yes, Reb. Your mother has told you of my decision. Yes, Rev. It is necessary for your father and mother to be together now, for your father's health and for your father's work. You will live with your uncle and continue to study with Jacob Kahn. Yes, Rev. You will behave toward your uncle and aunt as you would toward your father and mother. They have accepted the responsibility of caring for you. Yes, Reb. Outside the window, street vibrated softly, menacingly, in the black night. Asher Lev. Yes, Reb. You are entering the world of the other side. Be careful. I knew your grandfather. I knew your mother before you were born. I remember you as a child. I remember your mother's illness. Your family is very precious to me. I have looked upon you as a son. I have you and your parents constantly in my mind and my heart. Be careful of the other side, Asher Lev. Yes, Reb. I give you my blessing and my good wishes for a kosher and joyous Pesach. I went quickly along the hallway and down the stairs and out of the dark streets. It was cold. The street was cold. I saw a cobblestone square and a dilapidated building and streets. I saw a young man drawing figures in the dust of the square, using a stick and drawing in it one continuous line, the contours of hens and horses and birds. Steep, narrowed streets led from the square. The square was warm. Sunlight fell across the trees and the old buildings, and the young man gazing at the hens and horses and birds and the dust of the burning dark eyes. My street was cold now in the April night. I felt it cold against my face as I turned it on the apartment house where I lived. I felt it cold all through the first 2 days of Passover. Then I journeyed to galleries in Manhattan and was on streets filled with color and form. My father was not home. I had no school until the end of the festival. I used the intermediate days of the festival to wander along streets warmer than my own. I wandered into Anna Schaefer's gallery. It was a large, modern gallery taking up the entire fourth floor of a tall building of the 70s along Madison Avenue. I came out of the elevator and saw her sitting behind an ornate and intricately carved desk at the far end of the gallery to my left. She saw me and motioned me over to her. She seemed delighted. The gallery was crowded. There was a sculpture show that had received excellent notices and was attracting a great deal of attention. There were people at the desk, but she talked to me alone in the back stacked with canvases and sculptures. Yes, she knew exactly how I was getting along. Did I know Jacob Kahn was having a show in late October? I didn't know. Did I know he would be spending the summer in Provincetown painting and that he would take me with him? I didn't know. She stared at me. You are Asher Lev? Yes. You are the student of Jacob Kahn? Yes. What do you do in the studio? I paint. You do not talk to each other? We talk. He is a wicked old man. He is waiting to surprise you. Do not let on I said a word. Promise. I promised. She came down with me to the elevator. One day you will have your own show here, Asher Lev. Then you will be famous and you will be rich. Do not forget to act surprised when that wicked old man tells you. He told me 2 weeks later. I act surprised. The days grew warm. The street remained cold. My mother had begun the preparations for their journey. She purchased clothes. She shipped part of the library to an address in Vienna. She rented our apartment to a family that had recently arrived from Russia. She attended meetings with the Reb's staff. She defended her dissertation and received her doctorate. She seemed filled with new energy. She did everything quickly, radiantly. Sometimes I would hear her singing to herself. She seemed fulfilled. One day, movers came and took away the small table in the living room that had been her desk. She decided to ship that as well to the address in Vienna. It had good memory, she said. She wanted to be near the table. I stared at the empty space in the living room where it had stood, and it seemed a chasm now, laying across the floor and wall near the window. I wandered the cold street. In Jacob Kahn's studio, I began to paint my memories of my early years on the street. I painted my mother, young, with myself in her arms. I painted her holding me. I painted her walking with me. I painted us together on a parkway bench. I painted us standing against tall buildings. I painted us walking through Prospect Park, I painted us in a dreamlike green land with distant hills and pale clouds and a deep blue sky. Week after week, I painted my mother and myself together, though I did not always give the mother and the child our faces. Jacob Kahn watched me in silence. One Sunday in June, he stood behind me as I worked on a huge canvas of a mother and child seated on a mound of grass beneath tall, leafy trees. I heard him say softly, "Asher Lev, do you have any idea what you are doing?" I told him I was painting a mother and her child. He said nothing more about the paintings. On the last Thursday in June, my mother and I took a cab to a dock in Manhattan. I held her to me. I saw I was as tall as she was now. She cried. The cabin was narrow. I held her to me and felt her small and frail in my arms. "Have a safe journey, Mama." Later, I stood on the dock and watched the huge ship pull away. I took a cab back to my street. I stood outside the building, looking up at the window of our living room. Then I walked slowly beneath the cold trees to my Uncle Yitzkov's house. Book 3. That summer, I lived in a house on the edge of sand dunes. My room was a low-ceilinged attic with a window that looked out the dunes and the beach and the ocean. In the early morning, I could see the sun on the water and the silver foaming of the surf. The sun rose through the morning mist and burned the mist away, and then was golden on the beach and white on Cape Cod houses with a few hundred yards up the dunes where dark scrub brush grew in the sandy earth. Gulls wheeled and called above the water, and the sand, their wings stark white in the sun. I watched the gulls from the window of my room and over the porch of the house, and I painted them over and over again, using watercolors on washes of oils, painting them soaring into the sun, their wings in the wind, their wide, diving circles over the surface of the waves. Often I did not paint at all, but I sat on the porch listening and watching, feeling the salt wind on my face, hearing the surf and the cries of the gulls. An artist needs time to do nothing but sit around and think and let ideas come to him, Jacob Kahn said to me one afternoon on the porch after I sat on a chair for hours, gazing at the sunlight of the water and the sand and the houses farther up along the dunes. Gertrude Stein said that once. She was an impossible human being, but she was wise. Now I understand the sunlight and paintings by Hopper. He gazed at the houses along the dunes. "Yes," he said. "That is Hopper's white sunlight. One day you will understand the sunlight in Monet and Van Gogh and Cezanne." Often in the early morning, I came out of the house and walked across the dunes to the beach. The dunes were cold then from the night. I wore sandals and shorts and a shirt and had on my tefillin. Those mornings, the beach was my synagogue, and the waves and gulls were audience to my prayers. I stood on the beach and felt wind-blown sprays of ocean on my face, and I prayed, and sometimes the words seemed more appropriate to this beach than to the synagogue of my street. One morning I finished praying and I came back across the dunes and found Jacob Kahn on the porch. "I was watching you," he said quietly. "I used to pray once. Do you talk to God when you pray?" "Yes. I have lost the faculty. I cannot pray. I talk to God through my sculptures and my painting." "That's also prayer." He smiled faintly, the morning sun on his face. "The Reb said precisely that. You are following the party line, Asher Lev, but we know it is not the same thing, don't we?" Sometimes in the morning, I came in onto the porch and saw him walking with his wife across the dunes. She was a shy, quiet woman with short white hair and soft brown eyes. Her name was Tanya, and she spoke English with a heavy Russian accent. She loved to sit on the porch reading books in Russian and in French. I'd watch them walking together across the dunes. She came to below his shoulders in height, and often he would bend toward her as they walked. I would watch them together, and then turn my eyes away and stared out across the waves in the distant joining of water and sky. I would not eat food that was not kosher, so they brought a table and chair and a portable electric stove and refrigerator into my room, and I prepared my own food. Mostly, I ate canned foods and hard-boiled eggs and raw vegetables. On occasion, as I sat in the table eating, I wondered how my father and mother managed to eat during all the years of travel. After breakfast, Jacob Kahn and I would sit on the easels at the edge of the dunes and paint. He taught me how the Impressionists had painted light and what Cezanne had done with color and form. Once a sailboat came close to the shore and was circled by the gulls. Using washes of oils, he showed me how John Marine might have painted that. I had seen Marine's watercolors in museums. Now I began to understand their lines of tension, their fluidity and power. I began to understand too, though only with difficulty, why and how he painted as he did. The canvas was a two-dimensional field, he said. Any attempt to convert it to an object of 3 dimensions was an illusion and a falsehood. The only honest way to paint today was either to represent objects that were recognizable and at the same time integral to the two-dimensional nature of the canvas, or do away with objects entirely and create paintings of color and texture and form. Paintings that translated the volumes and voids in nature into fields of color. Paintings in which the solids were flattened and the voids were filled and the planes were organized into what Hans Hofmann called complexes. I watched him paint and began to understand what he meant. But I could not paint that way myself. I needed hands and faces and eyes. Though for a while now, I had not needed them to be 3-dimensional. You are too religious to be an abstract expressionist, he said to me one morning. We are ill at ease in the universe. We are rebellious and individualistic. We welcome accidents in paintings. You are emotional and sensual, but you are also rational. That is your Ladover background. It is not in my nature to urge a person to give up their background and culture in order to become a painter. That is because it is not in my nature to be a fool. A man's painting either reflects his culture or is a comment upon it, or it is merely decoration of photography. You do not have to be an abstract expressionist in order to be a great painter. In any event, by the time you reach your 20s, abstract expressionism may be gone as an important movement in American painting, though I do not think so. I think people will paint this way for thousands of years.